We live in a short, unique slice of time. Technology is moving faster than ever, with computing power starting off being centralized, then becoming decentralized, only to, as the 2010s gave way to the 2020s, well, becoming centralized again, with more and more being done off of our devices and us having less ownership over the software that we use. Today, the games of the past broadly are playable, but tomorrow, the games of today, they very likely will not be. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. As you may have guessed, we are going to be talking about how our games age, how they did in the past, how they do now, and the rather worrying future of games preservation, one that puts our particular form of art at great risk. Many works have endured for dozens, hundreds, or in rare cases, thousands of years. With games, that might be less the case, putting our greatest works at a greater chance of being forgotten than with most forms of art. In case you missed them, by the way, we also had a video up late Sunday evening covering the Elder Scrolls microtransaction situation, and another one today on the future tech of Starfield, the Elder Scrolls, and the future of Fallout 76, a game that actually fits quite well with today's topic, being harder to preserve than the standard offline Bethesda game because of its online nature. Now, what sparked off today's video? Well, pretty simply, something entirely different to the Elder Scrolls: Driveclub. Driveclub is a racing game for the PS4, and Driveclub was one of the big announcement titles for that console. It was eventually pushed back, releasing in 2014 to mixed reviews, but still managing to sell quite well, hitting 2 million copies sold as of 2015, and then going on to have a motorbike-themed release, as well as a VR adaptation, of course, for PSVR. No doubt, many people own this game, and therefore many people will be impacted by this announcement. Driveclub is shutting down in a year, on the 31st of March 2020. Online services will cease, meaning that the game will only be playable offline. And that's a little bit crazy because the game was not a total flop. It did sell many copies, having a VR release pretty darn recently. Online games typically do go dark eventually, but this one does feel sooner than most, especially considering that this was a first-party title with PlayStation having taken over development after the devs shut down in 2016. Thankfully, Driveclub does actually work offline, so you still will be able to strap on your PSVR and play the game. But here's the thing, that is increasingly not how our games work. There are multiple overlapping categories of preservation risk. Category number 1, online-only games with no bots and no LAN support. I mean, yeah, duh. Number 2, games that offload compute to the cloud. And number 3, this is not one that's really happened yet, but it will happen soon. Number 3 is games where both client and server run on a data center, with the game being streamed down to you. Essentially, Google Stadia. Now, the first category is simple. It's just when a game is entirely dependent on the publisher's servers. And the Battlefield franchise is a perfect example. Battlefield 2 does not rely on EA games, as servers are ran by the community. Battlefield 2 will continue to be playable for decades. The modern Battlefield titles, though, 1 and 5, odd naming, they do not allow for community-ran servers. Battlefield 1's server rental program depends on EA support, and Battlefield 5 doesn't even have a server rental program. In decades' time, Battlefield 2 will be playable. Battlefield 1 and 5 likely will not be. Let's cover category 2, games with offloaded cloud compute. What does that even mean, right? Well, data servers are becoming increasingly more powerful, and our internet is becoming very fast, at least in many areas. This means that more and more developers are going to be able to leverage cloud compute resources to do more with their games, opening up the possibility for more ambitious designs that could not be pulled off with just your local hardware alone. Unless the games that are built to use this are also made with offline functionality in mind, well, if those servers go down, they won't work. Now, you probably haven't seen this much in action, but trust me, the tech is there. While the final release of Crackdown 3 was tremendously underwhelming, and its development was a big mess, it actually did involve the creation of extremely impressive cloud-computed destruction. Much of this did not make it to the final game, but they had tech where a multiplayer game would be hosted across multiple servers, all, synchronous to the players. Now, this is use of that tech from a multiplayer perspective, but it could be used to enhance the capabilities of a game that is designed solo. I mean, hey, take the Total War franchise. Sure, the scale of the current titles is kind of impressive, but it's nowhere near simulating the full scale of a battle. Take the Battle of Cannae. That had well in excess of 100,000 men. Well, if some of that AI could be offloaded to a server, maybe Creative Assembly could scale up their battles. Maybe they could have the turn times of a large campaign be lower if they could use cloud compute resources to resolve turns. So as you can see, while these things may seem rather arcane in nature, there are valid reasons why devs would use such technology. Of course, with the negatives on game preservation being far beyond the horizon. Then the third category is games in which the client and the server are both ran in a data center, like Google's Stadia. In this case, zero compute is done locally. You basically just have a personal low latency live stream to a game that is running somewhere else. Unlike many multiplayer games, it would not be possible to just run your own private multiplayer server like you could with Battlefield 2. Why? Well, the client's literally never local. All you have is a video stream. And it really does highlight that when thinking about new paradigms, we also must think about the externalities. This is doubly so because Stadia games can be split into two categories. Traditional games for which Stadia is just a form of distribution, and then Stadia games, which are built using its platform features. Past this, we face many other issues. For an example, vertically integrated business models actually pose quite a risk to game preservation. What is that? Well, it's essentially just when, a game maker has many aspects of their business be in-house, including things like digital distribution. The more that companies have control over their products, the harder it is for fan preservation unless it's specifically allowed, and the less, people are able to do. And that means that should those companies find that their games are no longer profitable, they can just turn them off. Now, I recognize that this is getting very broad here, but there is a fundamental difference in the merging of business and art with video games. Simply put, the business and the art with video games are more closely linked than any other medium. It really is remarkable. Like, if CBS wants streaming money, they go and make Star Trek Discovery. If Netflix wants subscribers, they go and fund some original content. Well, with gaming, it's far beyond that. Video games are platforms unto themselves, often with multiple business models operating within them. This fundamentally makes our art more challenging to preserve. Sure, games like The Last of Us and God of War, they will be fine, but imagine if it was impossible to watch an old television show without the adverts, or to listen to old music without the adverts, if they were baked in that deep. So much of the business model is baked into the art with video games, to the point where purchasing said art is also basically purchasing your way into a digital store. I think this is going to pose quite the challenge to games preservation as time goes on, and not just from a technical feasibility perspective. I think it will damage how games are viewed over time. Now, look, I get that this is getting quite idealistic, and I don't think that we should immediately gut all of these business model things from games. I mean, a jobs collapse doesn't really seem like a good thing, but I do think it's worth keeping in mind as consumers, i.e. the people who propagate all of this media. So how do we actually deal with all of this? I think it's quite simple. By giving gamers a way to preserve their games. By having that be a design consideration. And I don't mean specifically building in support, but I do think that things like LAN support and player-round server support are important features for the preservation of games as time goes on. Now that's just one angle. There is also the angle of still being able to play a darn product that you purchased. That is a problem here, it's a problem with Driveclub. And even just stating it like that, well, that's how we view games, right? As a product that we buy. But that's actually not what we do when we buy a game. What we actually do is we purchase a license to use a service, just like how I may purchase a Spotify license. Sure, we typically purchase a lifetime license to our games, but it's still just that, a license to a service. There's nothing to stop them from ceasing that service, underlining how you never owned anything in the first place. We're really going to see this distinction become more and more important over time, as it is the direction that more and more of our industry is moving towards. It's all about that service revenue. Thankfully though, there is still a vibrant preservation community out there, with countless fan projects keeping old games alive and re-engineering games to work on modern hardware. And what's even better actually is that doing so now is a good financial move, with storefronts like goodoldgames.com leading the charge. But here's the thing, if I want to play some of my favorite old games like Pharaoh and Caesar, I will be able to in 20 years. But in 20 years, will the people who love many of today's internet infrastructure dependent games be able to have that same choice that I do now for the games that I love from when I was younger? No, probably not. And I guess that just is a bit of a sad, worrying thing. And it's that sort of thing where it's hard to think 15 years into the future about how things will be, especially relating to things now. And I guess it is just that thing. If I want to play Battlefield 2 from 2005, a game that I love basically 15 years ago, I will be able to in 15 years. Likely, assuming the internet doesn't blow up or something like that. But in 15 years, will somebody be able to play Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 3? I'm not really that sure, and that's actually a bit worrying. So there you go. That is my thoughts on game preservation. There is some great work being done out there, but equally, there are a load of fundamental issues with how games are currently constructed that, yeah, very much could be a roadblock to the preservation of our medium as time goes on, which is slightly worrying. So let me know what you think down below. Check out the other videos on the channel. A whole bunch went up in the last 2 days, and with that, I will see you next time.